Welcome to another episode of Lawsuits and Lessons. I'm Steve Cooper, and I want to introduce the host, the man who can drop some knowledge on you, who's always a pleasure to talk to. It's Mr. John Fagerholm. What's up, John?
How you doing, Steve? Great to be back with you, and lots to talk about today. So many things happening. Unfortunately, our guest was having some technical issues. Our guest was Mark Kreiner, the famous Mark Kreiner from Tap Out, but we'll bring him on several weeks from now. We do have a lineup, and we'll fit him into that in a few weeks. But it's just you and I today, Coop, and we have a lot to catch up on anyway, so maybe this is for the best.
Well, yeah, and I was sitting there, it's funny because I read Mark's bio, and he's a guy like you. You guys are, we in the entertainment industry, there's shakers and movers. You guys make stuff happen. And I wanted to ask you, and I was going to ask Mark this, are you born an entrepreneur, or is it something that you just develop it? Because I always wonder, because there's some people, I watched this Netflix documentary, Hulu documentary, or Amazon. It was about this guy who played football for USC, who became a big drug kingpin. And he's always a hustler in sports. He always gave more. He made the football team, he played volleyball. So that hustle was born into him. What do you think, being an entrepreneur, it's born into you, or is it something you can learn through your life?
I think we've touched on this before a few times, and our guest last week indicated he thinks it's more learned. I mean, I say born, but I'm sure you can learn it too. My brother is a prime example of that. He didn't have an entrepreneurial bone in his body, and now he's doing really well with a business that he started a few years ago. So I think you can learn it. And a lot of times people look and they observe. I've always been an entrepreneur. Even as a kid, I was an entrepreneur. During the summer, when my friends were sleeping in, I was out mowing lawns, right? And by the time they get up at noon, I'd be finished, but with a pocket full of money, right? So unfortunately, I was dumb enough to spend it on them after earning all that money. But even in school, I remember I had free lunch tickets. And so I would sell my free lunch tickets to people that had to pay full price. And then I would sell it for less than the full price of the lunch. I think it was like 50% off or something like that. And then I would eat a snack and then just save that money. Right. So, and this is probably like, I don't know, 5th, 6th grade, in the Navy, because I wasn't a big drinker back then. Now I drink, but back then I wasn't a big drinker and I wasn't a big party guy. So when our ship would hit port, these guys would spend all their money within a couple of days, and we got paid twice a month. And at the end of the month, when we got paid, then we would hit port a few days later, and they'd blow all their money, right? And then they'd always need more. And since I wasn't a big partier, like I said, I would lend them money. And then when we were out to sea in the middle of the month, they would have to pay me back plus interest. So I actually left the Navy with a little bit of savings. I think I've always been like that. I've always looked for the opportunity. So I don't know if you would say born with it, or you would say that I just learned early, but I think I was born with it.
Well, it's funny you said that about this cafeteria, because when I was young, I'm dating myself, Bubble Yum had come out, and the Bubble Yum was the big rage, and it was hard to get. And it was like 25 or 35 cents a pack. So you would go to 7-Eleven, you'd buy Bubble Yum for your 35 cents or whatever, and then have 5 pieces in it, and you sell them for $0.25. So you make $1. Now, when you're in 3rd or 4th grade,
Smart.
$1 is a lot of money.
Yeah.
But then the school found out about it, and they shut us down. They said there's no more Bubble Yum sales, and we were so pissed because we're like, looking back now, a school would say, "Oh, that's entrepreneurship. It's a business thing." But back then, they thought we were like corrupting people with gum, and I guess they didn't have a connection to a dentist.
You were probably competing with the school store too, So they weren't getting their tax.
You talked about money, and we'd always talk about money, and entrepreneurs want to make money, and you get in the business to make money. But we had talked. You're a big basketball fan. What do you think is going on right now in the mindset? Because the guy, Chauncey Billups, who is a Hall of Fame basketball player, played for years, makes a lot of money. He's a coach of Portland right now. What do you think is the mindset of someone to sit there and turn around and say, we're going to get involved in this big gambling ring? Do you think it's just greed, or you deal with a lot of business people? What do you think it is that will sit there and someone says they're going to risk their whole legacy, their future? He had rings, and now he's a footnote as a scandal. What do you think makes a business person, because he is a business person, what do you think makes someone do something like that?
Well, I mean, I don't know that story, so I don't know how involved he was in it. Was he just gambling, or was
He
he?
was the showpiece. So that he would lure big spenders because he was a basketball star from Vegas, and they did it in Vegas, they did it in LA, and he would lure these people in, and he was the face of the organization, and it was run by the mafia. But you think, as a business person, I mean, you charging people interest is just being a businessman. But when you get involved in the mafia as a business person, it has to be a little, you have to be a little bit off.
Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? Well, first of all, I don't begrudge anyone that has their vice, right? I don't think gambling. I used to go to poker games in the hills, and I saw one particular basketball player. I won't say his name, lose 75K in one hand. A very famous basketball player, by the way, but I won't say his name. Gambling is gambling. I mean, it's your money that you lose. I think the government should stay out of it. However, the mob ties, I think that's probably the issue. And then who knows what that's about? Is it because he wanted to take that risk because he thought he was making enough money, which I don't think would be the case? Or is it because they had something on him? I mean, I don't know. But I know that there are people that like the thrill of things like that. I mean, look at Michael Jordan. He got caught up in a gambling scandal right in the middle of his prime, right? And there's been plenty that's happened to. So I don't know why they would risk it.
The NBA is coming down hard on them. And, you had sent me an article earlier today, and I want to talk about that because it was an article about employers not paying employees. And, you said that, and there was a restaurant chain back here in the Philadelphia area, very big. I'm not going to mention it by name, but they're known for Krabby Fries. And it turns out the owner, and he has like five or six of them. He was sitting there and they were keeping tips. Okay, they were keeping tips, and he got sued, and he had to pay a big settlement because they were holding back the tips from employees. Somehow they said, we have to pool tips, but then I was a waiter. You know what you made, and I understand pooling. But you sent an article. Tell me about this law that's going on in L.A. That just is it all California? Just explain it to me. What happened?
Yeah, it's all California. So in California, as everybody knows, any business owner knows, the labor laws are pretty strict, probably the worst in the country. And I honestly don't begrudge any law that benefits the employees. But what I think the problem, at least the problem for me, is that it's heavy-handed and it's overly burdensome. I don't think it works. I think what it does is put businesses out of business, right? And this one in particular is pretty terrible. They have this thing called wage theft, right? And basically, it's an employee worked and didn't get paid all their wages. Now I get it. What people are going to say is, "Hey, that's the employer stealing from the employee." Sure, there are some of those people, but from my experience, it's more likely that it's a clerical error, a mistake, something like that, something that can be made up, not something that should put somebody out of business. And this particular new law is basically saying that if the government has a judgment, because the government investigates this, the Department of Labor, they go around going, "Hey, this is a car wash, the managers are sharing the tips," right? Okay, well, that's wage theft. All right, well, sometimes the managers are cleaning cars too, and the owner's not around, he doesn't see it. Or I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why this could be happening, right? And I'm giving you real life examples of car washes that I've represented where the owner's like, "Oh, well, I didn't know the manager was also taking tips." And then when you talk to the manager, he's like, "Yeah, but I'm washing cars too, like, why wouldn't I share in the tips?" Well, because it's not legal, right? But how do they know that? Department of Labor comes in, they ask a bunch of questions, and then they assess this big fine, and they go, "All right, here's the big fine. Um, Pay it, or we're going to take you to trial. And then besides your legal fees, we're going to double the dollar amount that you owe." Right? So you owe $100,000 that we've assessed, but we're going to charge you $200,000 for that. Basically, they strong arm you into settling with them, even if it's an honest mistake. And what I'm saying is that for the most part, from what I've seen, is honest mistakes. I rarely see some evil employer just stealing money from his employees. Right now, this particular law says that once they make their assessment, if you don't pay within 180 days, then they're going to triple the assessment. Here's the point that people miss: they're tripling the assessment, and then they're gonna give half to the employees, and then the government's gonna take half. So what does that tell you? It's a money grab, right? And basically they're just putting people out of business, from what I can see. It just I just don't trust anything they do, and I think that they just keep making these laws that make it harder to operate and to do business. And most businesses in California are not very large businesses that can sustain any of this stuff. So that's my opinion on that. I think it's a terrible law. I think that if somebody does something wrong, sure. If it's not intentional, give them an opportunity to correct it. If it is intentional, punish, but don't make the punishment um, worse than what the crime was. And now you have 20 employees, let's say, that work at a car wash that say, all right, well, I was underpaid, right? But now they don't have a job because you've put the guy out of business, and he's still not going to pay them because you've put him out of business. So
I always cracked up. Yeah, that you make such a valid point when they sit there and they're going to be out of a job. It always reminds me of when you see a restaurant. And this just happened to a brewery. It was open for years right here in Cherry Hill. It was a really cool little place. It was called Forgotten Boardwalk. And someone bought the building. They upped the rent to a huge level where people, they could not afford it. So now they leave, and the place has just stayed open. So the landlord's not collecting any rent. And it's like, you know what? Work with these people, because the bottom line is an open storefront, a storefront with, 70% of the rent you actually want is more valuable than an open storefront with nothing.
yeah, that's true, Steve. But remember, the people that own real estate, especially commercial real estate, for the most part, probably know what they're doing, right? So with real estate, there's more than just collecting the rents, right? There's the depreciation, there's the taxes, there's all kinds of things. So they've probably figured out some way to write that off, and it probably is more valuable to them to write it off than to have low rents, right? So that's my guess on that particular situation, just because I'm involved in real estate and I kind of understand the tax implications and the depreciation and all the other ways that you can either make money or save money in real estate. So, um, or it could just be a dumb landlord. I don't know.
Now, you say you're involved in real estate, and that's part of being your entrepreneurship. What legal, when you buy real estate, are there certain legal issues you put through your mind that will happen? I mean, how does you as a lawyer, you're just not someone buying real estate, laws. Is it hard to buy real estate in LA? I mean, for you or wherever you buy, is there certain laws that people wouldn't know they have to abide by? Because, some people just think, "Hey, I'm just going to go buy a house. I'll find a mortgage person, get it done."
Yeah, I don't buy anything in California anymore. It's just not worth it. I have the one place that I've owned forever that you've been to before, Steve, in Burbank, and that's the only place. All my other real estate in California, except for vacant land, I've gotten rid of. I've sold off because there's just no point in it. The What I think about when I purchase real estate, because I purchase out of state now, Texas mostly. I look at, is it landlord friendly or tenant friendly? So, in California, it's 100% tenant friendly. I mean, to somebody stops paying you rent, and it takes you a year to get them out of there, right? And then by the time you get them out of there, I mean, you're still paying your mortgage if you have a mortgage, and then on top of that, a lot of times, if there are people that are willing to stay without paying rent, then they damage your property. It's just a nightmare. It's not worth it. You can never go after them because they don't have anything, and then you're just throwing good money after bad. Uh, Whereas in Texas, 30 days they're out of there, right? Sheriff knocks and you didn't pay your rent, get out. So as a landlord, that's better business for me, right? Because it is a business. The other problem is they keep passing these crazy laws in California that makes it difficult to be a landlord. There was just one that was passed recently, and I'm trying to remember the gist of it. But basically, if if you rent to somebody and then they move in their family, like other family members that weren't part of the lease that you didn't agree could live there, you can't even evict them. The other one is if somebody commits a crime, right? Hey, this guy was arrested for XYZ. You can't even make that uh, something that you can evict them for. So, and there's no exceptions to that as far as I've seen. So, what if it's somebody that's convicted of molesting children and you have a building full of children? I can't evict the guy. And I understand innocent till proven guilty, but that's in the court of law. That's not on my private property, right? So, and then I have to take the risk for that. So, it just these ridiculous laws that make it very difficult to operate, and I just don't understand why California does it. It just is. It's uh, at some point all the people with that have the entrepreneurial mindset, the ones that create jobs, are just going to leave. And that's what's happening. There's a huge exodus out of California that's been happening for a decade. It started with the really big guys, and now it's the medium-sized guys, and pretty soon it's going to be the small guys. So I have my license in Texas also, and I got that license about a decade ago because so many of my clients were leaving California to start their businesses in Texas. So Texas is the number one place to do business in America, the most business friendly state. Guess what number 50 is?
California.
Of course, you know,
Now, let me ask you this about California, because I'm interested in what you're going to say about this, because as you said, you're a smart guy. You went to Texas. Look, Hollywood's leaving California. I mean, everything. You're right. People are leaving. I love California. I know actors who have moved from California just because it's a pain in the ass, and it's just I always laugh when I first started dating Joanna. I would come back here. I would buy a shirt, and there was no sales tax on clothes, and you're expecting to pay, let's say it's a $25 shirt, you're expecting to pay 27.50, and they're like $25. You're like, what? And then you go back to LA and you're like, wait, what? There's 10 cents, like the Dollar Tree. It was like actually the $1.10 tree because everything was taxed. But as a lawyer who, as you said, you foresaw 10 years ago you got your license in Texas. Give me three, for you as a business lawyer and with your clients, what you deal with, what are the three most frustrating business laws that you encounter that you think are just so stupid, and you have to sit there and go, this is why people are leaving California? There's got to be a few laws that you just sit there and go, this is just screws the employer. No one in their right mind would open up a business because they're going through this.
number one, I would say, is the litigation environment. I know you said specific laws, so I'll get to a particular law. But the reason why we have the litigious environment where employees basically just sue their employer, it doesn't even matter. Hey, you did a terrible job. You burned down my store, but now you're suing me because I fired you, right? And it's because the laws incentivize plaintiff side counsel. And the way they incentivize it is by laws that require the employer to be responsible for everything, number one. And then number two, if the employer is not incentivized to go through litigation and prove they didn't do something wrong, because the cost is all on the employer, right? And then even if they were to prove they didn't do anything wrong, all they've done is spent 200 grand, and 4 years of their life to get through trial, right? However, if anything is found, so let's say a jury says, well, she claims or he claims that you did 10 things wrong. 9 of these things are BS. We'll give you this one. We'll say, they worked these hours overtime over here and you forgot to pay them or you didn't pay them for whatever reason. Let's give the employee, the former employee, $5,000. Because that employee got something, you have to pay all the attorney's fees on the other side. So now you didn't just spend 200,000 on your lawyer, you spent 400,000 on both lawyers and whatever the jury says, right? So basically it's basically legalized extortion. Hey, we think you did this wrong. Well, no, I didn't do that wrong. My client says you did X, Y, and Z. And we believe our client that's enough to file a lawsuit. So we're going to file a lawsuit unless you give us $50,000. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not going to give you $50,000. Well, if you don't pay us the $50,000, it's going to cost you exponentially more than that. And you're going to have all of the risk and you're going to spend the next 4 years with sleepless nights. So you might as well give us the $50,000. That's how the game is in a nutshell. So that's one really bad law. The second really bad law, as I see it, is the workers' comp laws. So the workers' comp laws are also set up to incentivize fraud. And basically, the biggest fraud is the cumulative injuries, right? So you terminate somebody, they never fell down. There's no specific injury you can pinpoint. On this date, so and so cut themselves with a knife, using a knife, right? It's because I've been working here, and now I have carpal tunnel or whatever they're claiming, right? Well, every time someone files a workers' comp claim, and I'm not a workers' comp attorney, but I see this happen to my clients. There's some sort of percentage that's sort of factored in, and then your workers' comp insurance goes up exponentially. And let me tell you one scenario that just happened to a client of mine, uh, where his workers' comp was about 25,000 per year. Right, that's manageable. He laid off 5 people because business was bad. They all filed workers' comp claims after post termination for cumulative injuries. His workers' comp is now 500,000 per year. He can't stay in business because of that, because of that one fraud that they, and the law says that it's up to $150,000 in fines if you're caught defrauding the system, but they never punish it. And so everybody does it and businesses get hurt.
So how, why do business owners put up with this? It's like anything. You think there's enough business owners that you think you get a politician or someone, an activist who would bring this up, because you do hear about workman's comp, and the thing that sucks is there are people who actually get it, but there's also, I saw a story years ago where it was in New York City or someplace outside New York, and a bus got hit by a car, and they videoed it. All these people walking on the street ran on the bus. And they said, "Oh, I got hit." And of course they got busted because it was one of those John Stossel things. But it's amazing that, California, it's supposed to be for the people. And yet you're really screwing business owners. Don't people in California worry that, you're going to lose these companies? I mean, it takes time, but people are going to start leaving because, getting your workman's comp, don't they have a doctor's note? How do you prove that you let's say you were a doorman for 5 years at a hotel and you're opening the door. Well, of course, something's going to happen to your wrist, just like if you're a jogger, your knees are going to isn't there something where they say this is just normal wear and tear on the body on the profession you're in?
I mean, not that I've seen. And part of the problem is the insurance companies, because the insurance companies would rather settle it than fight it. Okay, even if we don't think this is real, we can't prove it isn't. So, or it'll cost us too much to prove it isn't. So we would rather just pay you, right? Well, that's fine for the insurance company, but all they're doing is raising the business owner's rates, right? Exponentially. And so it's the business owner that pays for it at the end of the day.
So have you had friends in LA or in California that have gone out of business because of some kind of law? And what was the law that pushed them out of business? Besides the workers' comp, said right then, have you had friends who have lost businesses because of some stupid law that it just doesn't really, you took them on to fight for them, but then sometimes things are overwhelming?
Well, most of the time it just ends up in bankruptcy, so they end up losing the business. And then the third terrible law, this leads me into the third terrible law is, now we all know that to avoid personal liability, right? Uh, People have corporations and LLCs and all these entities that protect from personal liability, right? Well, there's a terrible labor law that uh, basically says whoever committed the labor violation can be held personally liable. So whether that's the owner or the supervisor or the manager. So let's say you thought your employee was a exempt employee because they were, and to be an exempt employee, you need double minimum wage, and it has to be a certain thing like supervisor, manager, something like that, right? You need those two things to be exempt. So assuming it was a manager, let's say, and then you were paying them double minimum wage, the minimum wage goes up and you don't realize it. So now they're under that double minimum wage, right? So you, as the business owner, they're going to say, now you specifically are the one that violated the labor law. So now the company's held responsible and you're held personally responsible for it. That's what plaintiff side attorneys use to intimidate people into settling, even if they didn't do something wrong. Oh, besides ruining your business, we're also going to go after your house because we're going to hold you personally liable, right? So that's the third terrible law. And to answer your question, I haven't had friends that have gone out of business because of certain laws. I mean, I've had friends go out of business because of taxation and just how difficult it is to do business in California in general. But I've had clients that have had to file bankruptcy and or they've moved their business because it just isn't worth it.
So, as a business lawyer, and then this could be abroad and not just California or Texas, but just a broad question. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, as you do too, and there's a lot of young entrepreneurs out there, which is great. There's so many people starting up, but how important is it to get that LLC? Which explain what an LLC is real quick, and when do you think they should get it in their business path?
So an LLC is a limited liability company, and you have C corps, S corps, limited liability companies, and then DBAs. DBA is the worst because that's just you. Uh, and then with the LLCs, the S corps, and the C corps, it all just depends. I think you you decide which entity to have based on conversations with your lawyer and conversations with your CPA, right? Because all the lawyer is looking at is liability. And what the CPA is looking at is taxes, right? So they need to work together to figure out what's the best entity for you. The interesting thing about that is, at least in California, the two biggest costs you're going to have if you're growing and you're big enough is the biggest liability you're going to have, or the biggest cost you're going to have is employees or taxes or both, right? But the biggest liability you're going to have is probably your employees. That's where most of the lawsuits come from.
Okay, but so when do you think someone should incorporate? I mean, should someone who's doing business headshots, which I don't get, I don't really get the business headshot anymore. Like you don't have one. I have an old one, but I don't understand why people have. It's like it's not like if you're in sales, why do you need a business headshot? It's not like you're going into a sales call like an acting and dropping off your headshot. I don't really understand that whole thing. Like right now, there's this big fascination with get your headshot. It's like you don't need it. But let's say someone's doing business headshots and they're doing well, but it's only them. Would you say become a corporation, or would you say just get a good CPA and get a business attorney, or what would you suggest?
Well, I always say get a good CPA. And then as far as the risk, or as far as getting an entity or just doing a DBA, it's what's the risk level and how collectible are you, right? If I don't own anything, who cares, right? Go ahead, sue me. You're never going to get anything, right? I'll even let you take a default judgment, right? You'll never collect from someone that doesn't have anything, right? So that's how the wealthy do it. They make sure that nothing is in their name, so you can never collect anything from them personally. But if you start making money or you start entering into significant contracts, definitely if you start employing people, you should have an entity. I don't think you should do it just as a DBA. I think that's too much risk.
Okay, and we're gonna wrap up soon. That's what I asked you. We gave you the laws that you don't like in California that aren't fair to business owners. I want to give you the laws. Give me one or two, maybe three laws that, as a business owner in Texas, that makes it so valuable for people to move, or in other states. What makes it so? What are the laws that really are helpful to the owner, the employer?
I practice in California. So even though I'm barred in Texas, most of the work I do out of Texas is deals, right? So there aren't a lot of laws I have to play around with in Texas. But what I do notice in Texas is you're not getting a lot of lawsuits from employees suing employers, right? Because it's very business friendly. They don't make it easy. Sure, you can still sue for the big things, sexual harassment, discrimination, like all those big things, but there's no incentive here to sue the employer. That's the big difference with California. California, every Tom, Dick, and Harry coming out of law school jumps into the employment space because it's easy, right? Whereas in Texas, there aren't all these laws that incentivize attorneys to sue. Like, hey, if I win $1, I'm going to get all my legal fees. Like that's crazy, right? But that's the way it is in California.
Okay, well, I'm going to say Mark Kreiner couldn't come on, but he'll be on in a few weeks. Just tell people a little about how fascinating this guy is, so they'll know when they hear Mark Kreiner, they'll want to sit there and they're going to want to listen. Just give a quick, brief bio of this guy because it's his career is fascinating.
Yeah, Mark's incredible. One of my great friends. I met him during the Tap Out days when I was doing legal work for Tap Out. So Mark started out as a DJ in discos when disco was new, and then he became a manager and started managing a lot of the big disco acts. He's got hundreds of gold and platinum records for it, and at some point they named him the King of Disco. He had some wild days and some wild stories that I'm sure he'll get into when is on in a couple weeks. After disco faded away, then he got into the infomercial space, and he was one of the first guys buying big blocks of time for infomercials and then selling them to the Girls Gone Wild and those types of things. After that sort of fell off a little bit, then he joined Tap Out as the president of Tap Out, and I knew the Tap Out guys already. So I was already doing stuff for them, and then Mark came on board, and that's how we met each other. But when I was doing stuff for the Tap Out guys prior to Mark, uh, they were grossing probably 500 grand selling T-shirts. Mark got on board, and within 2 years, they were doing about 200 million licensing everything, not selling T-shirts, but licensing the Tap Out brand. So the guy's a genius. And then after they sold Tap Out, he opened up a restaurant, which still exists in Atwater, and it was voted by Yelp one year as the 7th best restaurant in all of America. And I think it was a year ago, Yelp voted it one of the top 20 places in the world to visit. So the guy really knows his stuff, knows a lot of people, is a wealth of knowledge, and has had this crazy LA life that he's got stories for days. And I have a particular story about Mark and something he told me. And then I was like, this seems like an exaggeration. But then I found out later it was true. Just watching a show on or watching something on ESPN, and I was like, oh my God, he was telling the truth. There he is right there. So Mark's a pretty fascinating guy, and I look forward to introducing him to our audience.
And I'm just saying it's great because you get so many great guests and people. Maybe I'll bring an entrepreneur in here. Then maybe I know a guy who owns a fruit stand in Camden, New Jersey. No, John's got the great guests. So, John, how can people get in touch with you? And first of all, people go to YouTube, and it's your company. The YouTube channel is under your company.
Defend My Biz is my YouTube channel. My website is defendmybiz.com.
And if you go to Defend My Business, there's not only our past episodes, but there's John has a lot of short videos of him giving some insight. So please check him out. And for this show, don't forget, besides YouTube, you can go on to Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, search Lawsuits and Lessons, and subscribe and keep listening because, every week, me and John have a lot to talk about. And tonight we had to do it on the fly, but that's what you do when you know someone. He has so many great guest lines up, and he has so much. He has a wealth of knowledge, people. I mean, I'm just the pretty face that makes people smile, but John's great. And you can reach me if you have any legal issues you want to talk about. Just hit me up at the Coop Tank at yahoo.com. Search the Coop Tank on YouTube. It's my award-winning podcast, mailer podcast, Cooper Talk. It's coopertalk.net. I just had the wonderful Ali Walker on, who was in the show The Profiler and Sons of Anarchy. So, John, give us some closing knowledge before we go.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for paying attention. And Steve, thank you very much for all that you do for the show. And until next week, everybody, good night.